My elderly neighbor ran down the street screaming like a maniac every single morning. I was terrified of her, until the night she slid a note under my door saying she was not crazy. She was only pretending so my husband would not suspect anything. Check the backyard security cameras, the paper said. When I opened the footage, I saw my husband digging something in the dark, and next to him were tools that no innocent man would need to have. But before we continue, make sure you are subscribed to the channel and write in the comments where you are watching this video from. We love knowing how far our stories are reaching. My name is Sarah. I am 32 years old, and for a long time I believed I had built the perfect life. I married Michael 4 years ago after an intense and passionate courtship that seemed straight out of a romance movie. He was attentive, affectionate. He worked as a sales manager at a tech company and always made me feel like the most important woman in the world. We lived in a comfortable house in a gated community on the outskirts of Chicago, surrounded by silence and tranquility. But that tranquility started to crack about 6 months ago when something strange began happening every night. Our neighbor, Mrs. Linda, a lady in her 70s who lived alone next door, began having nightly outbursts. Always around 2 in the morning, I would wake up to the sound of hurried footsteps on the sidewalk and sharp screams that cut through the early morning like knives. She ran back and forth in front of our gate, screaming nonsense, sometimes laughing hysterically, other times crying as if she were seeing something terrible. At first, I was terrified. My heart raced every time I heard those screams. I woke up sweating cold, holding onto Michael S.'s arm, begging him to do something. But he always calmed me down with that serene and firm voice I loved so much. Honey, Mrs. Linda is sick. She has dementia. We cannot blame her for that, he would say, stroking my hair while I trembled under the blanket. If we call the police or the fire department, they will put her in a horrible facility. Do you want that on your conscience? And I, of course, did not want that. Michael had that gift of making me feel guilty for being afraid, as if my compassion was lacking. So I swallowed my fear and tried to go back to sleep, even with the screams echoing through the empty street. Weeks went by, and the episodes became part of the routine. Every early morning, the same ritual. Mrs. Linda appeared running, screaming, hitting lampposts, laughing alone. The other neighbors complained too, but no one did anything concrete. Some said she had family in another city, but they had abandoned her there. Others said she had always been strange, even before getting old. Michael remained my safe harbor. He never showed irritation with the situation, only an almost saintly patience. Sometimes I saw him through the window watching Mrs. Linda from afar with a thoughtful expression I could not decipher. When I asked him what he was thinking, he smiled and said he was just worried about her safety. She could hurt herself running like that in the dark. He commented, "But there is not much we can do, honey, unless we have patience." And I had patience, or at least I tried to, but the fear did not go away. Every night I went to sleep with a heavy heart, knowing that in a few hours I would be woken up by those screams. I started having insomnia. I drank chamomile tea, took melatonin, anything to help me relax. But nothing worked completely. One thing that started bothering me besides the screams were small details I had been noticing about Michael. Things I did not pay attention to before but now seemed to accumulate like pebbles in a shoe. For example, he was leaving work later. He came home sometimes after 11 at night, tired, with clothes slightly dirty with soil or dust. When I asked, he said he was supervising IT infrastructure projects at client companies, that he needed to visit warehouses and construction sites. It made sense. I had no reason to doubt, but there was also the fact that he started locking his phone with a password. Before it was just facial recognition, and I had free access if I needed to use it for anything. Now a 6-digit password, which he said was a company requirement for security reasons. Again, it made sense. And there was the backyard. Our backyard was big with some fruit trees and a lawn that Michael loved to take care of. But recently, he started moving a specific area near the old oak tree in the back. He said he was planning to build a wooden deck, a gourmet space to host friends. He started digging. moving dirt, bringing in materials. He did everything alone, usually at night or on weekends, saying it was a surprise for me, and he wanted to do it with his own hands. I thought it was strange he did that alone without hiring anyone, but Michael was always very handy, very skilled. And I was too busy with my own job as a graphic designer working from home most of the time to question much, until that night arrived. Michael had a business trip to Seattle, 3 days of conferences and meetings. He left on a Thursday morning. He gave me a long kiss on the forehead and told me to be careful, to lock the doors well, not to open for strangers, as always jealous and worried. I stayed alone in the house that Thursday night. I ate a light dinner, watched a series on Netflix, tried to relax, but the loneliness of the big house made me restless. I kept hearing noises, the wind hitting the windows, the creaking of the wood in the ceiling, small clicks that sounded like footsteps. And then punctually at 2 a.m, Mrs. Linda S. screams began. This time it seemed different, closer, more insistent. I was lying in bed rigid with fear when I heard a distinct sound, a shuffling noise, as if something was being pushed under the front door. I got up slowly, my heart hammering in my chest. I put on my slippers and walked to the living room, turning on the lights along the way. When I got near the door, I saw a piece of folded white paper on the floor. I picked it up with shaking hands. It was common notebook paper folded several times. I opened it slowly and read the words written in blue pen in shaky but legible handwriting. Sarah, I am not crazy. I am not senile. I am pretending. Your husband cannot know that I am lucid. Please look at the security cameras of your backyard, the footage from the last few days. You need to see what he's doing when he thinks no one is watching. Then come to my house. I will be waiting. Please trust me. Your life may be in danger. My mouth went dry. I read the note 3 times, trying to process. Mrs. Linda was not crazy. She was pretending. Why? And what would Michael be doing in the backyard that I needed to see? My first instinct was to dismiss it as the delusion of a truly sick person. But something in the writing, in the way the words were organized, seemed too lucid to be the work of someone with advanced dementia. And there was the last sentence. Your life may be in danger. This chilled my spine. I went to the office where the computer connected to the house security system was. Michael had installed cameras about a year ago, saying it was for our protection since the subdivision was secluded and had some unoccupied houses. We had cameras at the entrance, in the garage, in the service area, and in the backyard. I turned on the computer with trembling hands. I accessed the monitoring software. The cameras recorded continuously, and the files were kept for 30 days before being replaced. I started searching the backyard recordings. I chose a random date from the previous week when Michael said he had stayed up late working on that damn deck. I fast-forwarded the video to the night. It was around 11. The image was black and white with that greenish quality of night vision. And then I saw. Michael was in the backyard, but he was not building any deck. He was digging deep, with a shovel, sweating, moving dirt with an almost frantic intensity. And beside him, illuminated by the dim light of the neighbor S post, I saw a large black plastic tarp, folded and ready, the kind of tarp used to cover things. My stomach churned. I continued watching. Michael dug for almost 2 hours. The hole became deep, maybe 5 feet. He stopped, wiped the sweat, looked around as if checking if anyone was watching. Then he took the tarp and spread it carefully next to the hole. And then he took something that made my blood freeze, a thick rope and industrial duct tape. He placed that inside the hole, covered it with a little dirt, and then left the scene. I paused the video. My hands were sweating so much the mouse almost slipped. I tried to breathe, but it seemed there was not enough air in the room. What was that? Why was my husband digging a huge hole in the yard, hiding a tarp rope and duct tape? And why do it in the middle of the night? Secretly, I searched other dates. He had done this on at least 3 different nights in the last 2 weeks, Always the same pattern. Arrive late, go straight to the yard, dig, organize materials, cover everything back up. And in one of the recordings, I saw something that made me stand up and pace the room, wanting to vomit. Michael was crouched near the hole and had an object in his hand. I zoomed in on the image as much as I could. It was a knife. A large knife with a black handle which he wiped carefully with a cloth before putting in a bag. It was not a kitchen knife. It was a hunting knife, the kind that cuts meat with precision. I sat on the floor, hugging my knees, trying not to panic. My husband, the man I loved, who shared a bed with me every night, who kissed me every morning before leaving for work, was digging a grave in our backyard, a grave the size of a human body, and preparing tools that seemed destined to. What ties someone up? Hide someone? And the only question hammering in my head, insistent and terrifying, was, who is that grave for? I stayed paralyzed on the office floor long enough for my legs to start tingling. The light from the computer illuminated my face in blue tones, while my brain desperately tried to find a rational explanation for what I'd just seen. Maybe Michael was doing some complex gardening work. Maybe he needed to bury debris, construction scraps, something that required a deep hole. But then why the tarp? Why the rope? Why the knife? And why hide all this from me? I looked again at Mrs. Linda S. note, still crumpled in my hand. Your life may be in danger. The words seemed to pulse on the paper, gaining a weight I could no longer ignore. Could that hole be for me? The idea was too absurd to process. Michael loved me. Didn't he? He was always attentive, careful, present. He never raised his voice at me, never showed any sign of violence or aggression. We were happy. I was sure we were happy. But then why that feeling in my chest, that chill in my spine, that small, insistent voice in my head saying something was very, very wrong. I got up from the floor with difficulty and went back to the living room. I looked out the window toward Mrs. Linda S. house. It was all dark and silent now. She had stopped screaming a few minutes ago. The note said to go there, that she would be waiting. Part of me wanted to lock all the doors, crawl under the covers, and pretend none of that was happening. Wait for Michael to return from the trip. Act normally. Maybe even ask about the deck casually and gauge his reaction. But another part of me, the part that had just seen my husband prepare what looked a lot like a clandestine grave, knew I could not simply ignore that. If Mrs. Linda had information, if she knew something I did not, I needed to listen to her. I put on some sneakers, dressed in a hoodie over my pajamas, and grabbed my cell phone. I checked 3 times that it had a full battery. I thought about calling someone, my sister, my mom, a friend. But what would I say? Hey, I think my husband is digging a grave in the yard. I am going to the crazy neighbor S house to investigate. They would think I was losing my mind. I opened the front door carefully, looking both ways before stepping out. The community was completely silent. There were no bright streetlights, just spaced out posts that created more shadows than light. Mrs. Linda S. house was only 20 yards from mine, but the walk there seemed like miles. I walked fast along the sidewalk, arms crossed over my chest. When I reached her gate, I hesitated. What if this was a trap? What if Mrs. Linda was really crazy and was luring me into her house for some twisted purpose? But then the front door opened, illuminating the path to the entrance. And there she was. Mrs. Linda did not look at all like the disheveled, hysterical woman I saw running through the streets every night. She was wearing simple but clean clothes, sweatpants and a long-sleeved sweatshirt. Her white hair was tied in a neat low bun. And her eyes, the eyes I always imagined empty and confused, were perfectly lucid, fixed on me with an intensity that made me stop halfway. "Sarah," she said, and her voice was firm, without a trace of the performative madness I was used to hearing. "Come in, please. We need to talk." I swallowed hard and moved forward. I went through the gate, crossed the small front garden, and entered the house. The interior was surprisingly normal. Antique furniture, but well kept. Smell of lavender. Everything tidy and clean, nothing to suggest a person with dementia lived there. Mrs. Linda closed the door behind me and locked it. The sound of the deadbolt made me jump. "Sorry," she said, noticing my startle. "It is a precaution. Sit down, please." She pointed to a floral fabric sofa, and I sat on the edge, tense hands clenched in my lap. Mrs. Linda sat in an armchair across from me and looked at me with a seriousness that made me feel like I was being evaluated. "Did you see the footage?" she asked directly, without beating around the bush. I nodded, my voice stuck in my throat, and she insisted. "Did you understand what is happening?" "I do not know," I admitted, and my voice came out weak, almost a whisper. "Michael is digging a hole in the yard. There is a tarp, tools, but I do not understand." "Why what?" For Mrs. Linda sighed deeply, as if gathering strength to tell something very heavy. "Sarah, I am going to be direct with you because we do not have much time. Michael is not who you think he is, and that hole in your yard is not for a deck or a remodel." My heart raced. "What are you talking about? I am saying that your husband is planning to kill you." The words fell on me like a bucket of cold water. I shook my head, refusing. "No, that makes no sense. Michael loves me. He would never. He pretends to love you." Mrs. Linda interrupted me, her voice hard but not cruel, just like he pretended to love the others. I blinked, confused. The others. She got up and went to a small desk in the corner of the room. She opened a drawer and took out a file folder. She came back and placed it in front of me, opening it to reveal a pile of papers, printed photos and notes. 6 years ago, a woman named Bethany died in suspicious circumstances. She was married to a man who worked in the tech sector. They lived in a secluded house just like you. She was found dead in the yard, and the police archived the case as a domestic accident. A fall followed by head trauma. The husband, devastated, sold the house and disappeared. She pushed a photo in my direction. It was of a young woman, pretty, brown hair and a wide smile. And beside her in the wedding photo was a man I did not recognize immediately but who had familiar features, the jaw, the shape of the eyes. 2 years later. Mrs. Linda continued turning another page. Another woman, Caroline, married to a sales manager. Same story. Secluded house. Sudden death. Archived as an accident. Another photo. Another woman. Another man beside her. And this time, even with different hair and the glasses he wore in the picture, I recognized him. It was Michael. My head spun. No, it cannot be. That cannot be him. He changes his name, his appearance, his city. But the pattern is always the same, Sarah. He marries women who have some assets, some inheritance, something of value. He makes them fall in love, builds a seemingly perfect life. And then when the time is right, he eliminates them and keeps everything. I felt as if the ground were opening up beneath me. How do you know all this? Who are you? Mrs. Linda leaned forward, eyes fixed on mine. I was a private investigator for 30 years, Sarah. I retired 10 years ago, but I still keep contacts. When Michael and you moved here, I recognized him. It took time, a lot of research, cross-referencing data, but I was sure it was him. The problem is I do not have enough concrete proof for the police to act, so I started watching him and pretending I was crazy so he would not suspect me. I looked at her stunned. You pretended to be crazy to protect me, to protect you and gather evidence, she confirmed. But time is running out. Michael is accelerating the plan. He dug that hole in the last few days because he is preparing. And when he returns from that trip, Sarah, he is going to execute. I brought my hands to my face, trying to hold back the tears that were starting to fall. But why me? I do not have a fortune. I have nothing special. You inherited this house from your parents, didn't you? Mrs. Linda interrupted. A house on a large, valuable lot in an area that is being highly sought after by developers. Michael knows that. He married you for that. It was true. My parents had died in a car accident 5 years ago, shortly before I met Michael. The house had been my inheritance. Michael always said he loved the place, that he wanted to build our future there. But now, looking back, I realized he had been the one to suggest we move here, the one who insisted it would be perfect, the one who planned everything down to the smallest detail. What was he waiting for? I asked, my voice choked. Why now? Probably waited long enough not to raise suspicions. 4 years of marriage is a reasonable time. And now, with the land increasing in value, he must have decided it is the moment. I took a deep breath, trying to organize my thoughts. What do I do? Do I go to the police? Show the footage? Mrs. Linda shook her head. The footage shows suspicious behavior, but it is not proof of a crime. He can claim he was doing anything else. And without a body, without concrete evidence of intent to murder, the police cannot arrest him. So what do I do? I asked, desperate. Wait for him to kill me? No, said Mrs. Linda firmly. We catch him in the act. We make him reveal himself. I looked at her, not understanding. You are going back home. You are going to act normally when he returns from the trip. And we are going to set up a situation where he is forced to show his true intentions with witnesses, with irrefutable proof. My whole body was trembling. That is crazy. I cannot pretend everything is fine, knowing he wants to kill me. You can, Sarah, and you will be able to, because the alternative is to run now and spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, waiting for him to find you. Men like Michael do not give up easily. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the decision. My entire life had changed in a single night. The man I loved, trusted, was a murderer, and now I needed to be strong enough to face him. What do I need to do? I finally asked, opening my eyes and looking at Mrs. Linda. She smiled. Not a happy smile, but the smile of someone who recognizes courage when she sees it. First, you are going to go back home. Tomorrow, act as if nothing happened. Reply to his messages normally. And when he returns, we put our plan into action. I went back home with shaking legs and my head spinning. Every shadow on the street seemed to be watching me. Every noise made me jump. I locked the door as soon as I entered. I checked all the windows twice and went straight to the bedroom. But I could not sleep a single minute that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to process everything Mrs. Linda had told me. Michael, my husband, was a serial killer who killed for money. He had done it before with other women, and now I was next on the list. I picked up my phone several times, thinking about calling my sister, someone in the family. But what would I say? I discovered my husband wants to kill me, but I have no proof, so I need to pretend everything is fine to catch him in the act they would commit me. In the early morning, I received a message from Michael. Honey, the meeting ended late. Tomorrow there is more. Love you, sleep well. I looked at those words on the screen. So common, so normal, so affectionate, and I felt nauseous. How could he write that knowing what he was planning to do to me? How can someone be so cold? So calculating, I replied with a simple, love you too. Good night, as I would normally do. And then I stared at the conversation, wondering how many other women had received similar messages from him before dying. When the sun finally came up, I was exhausted, but unable to relax. I took a long shower, letting the hot water fall over me while I cried silently. I tried to pull myself together. I needed to act normally. I could not give any sign that I knew anything. During the day, I worked on the computer, or at least pretended to work. In reality, I spent hours searching the internet looking for information about the women Mrs. Linda had mentioned. I found old news reports, obituaries, some articles about the deaths, and in all of them, the same narrative. Tragic domestic accidents, devastated husbands, no suspicion. Michael had been perfect at covering his tracks. If it were not for Mrs. Linda, he would have been perfect with me too. In the afternoon, she appeared at my door dressed in her usual clothes, a bit disheveled hair messed up on purpose, but her eyes were alert. Intelligent. Can we talk? She asked loud enough so it seemed she was just being a friendly neighbor. I let her in. We sat in the living room and she handed me a small object, a pearl brooch. It is a camera and microphone, she explained in a low voice. Wear this when Michael comes back. It will record everything. I took the brooch, feeling its weight in the palm of my hand. It seemed so small, so fragile to carry the responsibility of possibly saving my life. And then I asked, "What is the exact plan?" Mrs. Linda leaned forward. "When he returns, you are going to tell him you need to talk to him about something important. You will lead him to the backyard near the hole he dug. You are going to confront him, but in a way that he feels in control. Men like him love to brag, to show off when they think they have won. What if he attacks me before that I will be watching? I have cameras pointed at your yard from my house. At the slightest sign of real danger, I call the police." But we need him to incriminate himself, Sarah. We need him to admit what he is planning, preferably with details. I bit my lip, nervous. And if he does not fall for the trap? What if he realizes? He will not realize. Men like Michael are arrogant. He thinks you are too fragile, too naive to suspect him. Use that to your favor. We spent the rest of the afternoon rehearsing. Mrs. Linda made me repeat several times what I should say, how I should act, how to provoke Michael subtly without seeming too obvious. It was like memorizing a script for a play, except the stage was my own house, and the price of error was my life. Michael returned on Saturday night just as planned. I heard his car pulling into the garage, and my whole body tightened. I took a deep breath, adjusted the brooch with the camera on my blouse, and forced a smile on my face. When he walked through the door, he had his travel bag and that charming smile that once made me fall in love. He came toward me, hugged me tight, and kissed me for a long time. "I missed you," he murmured against my hair. "You too." I lied, my stomach turning. He dropped the bag and went to the kitchen to get water. I followed him, trying to appear casual. "How was the trip?" I asked, leaning on the counter. "Productive. We closed some good contracts. I'm going to need to travel again next month, but this time it will be quicker." "Oh," was all I could say. He looked at me, head slightly tilted. "Are you okay? You look tired. Just didn't sleep very well alone here. The house gets very quiet. Did Mrs. Linda act up?" he asked, and I noticed a strange glint in his eyes at the mention of her name. "Yes, she did. She ran screaming yesterday again, but I am already used to it." Michael gave a small smile. "Poor thing. She is going to end up hurting herself one of these days." The way he said that gave me chills. It seemed more like a prediction than genuine concern. I cleared my throat. "Michael, I wanted to talk to you about something. It is important." He straightened up, attentive. "Sure. What happened?" "It is about the backyard, about what you are building there." I saw a subtle shift in his expression, a tension almost imperceptible around his eyes. "The deck. What about it?" "It is just that. I was looking out the window the other day and I saw you made a very big hole there, and it made me curious. Can you show me how it is going to look? I want to understand the project." Michael stayed silent for a moment too long. Then he smiled, but the smile did not reach his eyes. "Of course, honey. Do you want to go now?" "We can," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. He put his arm around my shoulders and guided me to the back door. My heart was beating so hard I was sure he could hear it. We passed through the utility room and went out to the yard. The night was clear, with a full moon, illuminating everything with a cold, silvery light. We walked across the grass until we got near the old oak tree, and there it was, the hole. He had covered it with wooden planks, probably to disguise it, but you could see the edges, the dirt removed around it. So Michael said, letting go of my shoulder and walking to the edge of the hole, "Here is going to be the foundation for the deck. It needs to be deep to be stable. Seems very deep for a simple deck. I commented, approaching cautiously. It is because I want to do something elaborate. With different levels, it is going to look beautiful. He spoke with such naturalness, such conviction that for a second I almost believed him. I almost forgot I was looking at what would probably be my grave. Michael. I began, and my voice trembled slightly. I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. He turned to me with a curious expression. Sure, you can ask, why did you marry me? The question took him by surprise. He blinked, confused. What do you mean, why? Because I love you, Sarah. You know that. But why me specifically? What attracted you to me? Honey, why are you asking this? He said, taking a step in my direction. Are you feeling insecure? Just answer, please. Michael sighed as if he were being patient with a child. You were. Special. Smart. Pretty. Independent. When I met you, I knew I wanted to spend my life with you. And the house I asked, my voice becoming firmer. The house I inherited from my parents. Did that have any influence on your decision? I saw the change in his face. Subtle, but it was there, the mask starting to crack. What kind of question is that? He said, and there was a new hardness in his tone. It is a simple question, Michael. Did you marry me for the house? He let out a short laugh without humor. You are being ridiculous. Ridiculous, I repeated, feeling the anger starting to boil inside me. I know about the others, Michael. Bethany, Carolyn. I know what you did to them. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the crickets stopped chirping. Michael stood completely still, looking at me with an intensity that made me want to run. But I forced myself to stay still to look back at him. And then slowly, he smiled. But it was not the charming, warm smile I knew. It was something cold, empty, terrifying. So you know. He said calmly, as if we were discussing the weather. The crazy old lady told you, didn't she? I knew she was pretending. I should have gotten rid of her first. My blood froze. He had just confessed. He had just admitted everything. Why, Michael, I asked, and my voice came out broken. Why do this? He shrugged hands in his pockets, completely relaxed. Money, of course. Why else? I grew up with nothing, Sarah. I had to work like a dog my whole life just to survive. And then I realized there was an easier way. Lonely women, with assets, desperate for company. It was almost too easy. You are a monster, I whispered. I am practical, he corrected. And you would have been the easiest of all if that witch hadn't meddled. He took his hands out of his pockets, and I saw he was holding something. A rope. But it is okay. He continued advancing slowly in my direction. This just complicates things a little, but the result will be the same. I stepped back, but he was faster. He grabbed my arm with strength, pulling me toward the hole. No, I screamed, trying to break free. And then suddenly, bright lights turned on around the yard, voices shouting, people running. Michael stopped, confused, looking everywhere. And before he could process what was happening, police officers emerged from behind the fence, from the sides of the house, completely surrounding us. Police. Let her go and put your hands where we can see them. Michael let me go, stunned. I ran away from him toward the officers, and there near the fence I saw Mrs. Linda holding a tablet showing the live feed of what had just happened. She had planned everything, the cameras, the hidden police waiting for the exact moment. Michael was handcuffed, still seeming not to believe he had been caught. He looked at me one last time before being taken away, and what I saw in his eyes was not remorse or regret. It was just anger for having failed. The days that followed were a blur of statements, lawyers, and interviews with the police. The house was cordoned off as a crime scene for almost a whole week. Yellow police tape, forensics checking every corner of the yard, digging the hole Michael had finished looking for more evidence. They found more than they expected, Besides the tarp, the rope, and the duct tape, they found a toolbox buried near the oak tree. Inside it, surgical gloves, more ropes, a handsaw, heavy-duty cleaning products, and written instructions in detail on how to dispose of a body without leaving traces. Michael had planned every step with a coldness that left me nauseous for days. I was forced to stay in a hotel during the investigation period. Mrs. Linda offered to stay with me, and I accepted without hesitation. I could not be alone. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Michael S. face that night, admitting everything with that terrifying calm. The recordings from the brooch camera and the cameras Mrs. Linda had installed strategically around the house were fundamental. They captured every word of his confession, every movement. There was no way to deny it, to claim misunderstanding or mount a defense. Michael was finished. The investigation deepened. The police started investigating the previous cases Mrs. Linda had mentioned. Bethany and Caroline. The cases were reopened, exhumations were requested, new forensic analyses were done, and one by one the pieces fit. Michael was not just a murderer. He was a meticulous predator who had operated for almost a decade, changing identity, appearance, city, always one step ahead of the authorities. He had used at least 5 different names. He had bank accounts in 3 states. And most disturbing of all, he kept a notebook where he wrote details about his victims. When the police showed me the notebook, I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. There I was. Sarah, 32 years old, graphic designer, heir to property, valued at almost $1 million. Weaknesses: low self-esteem, emotional dependence, distant family, strategy, intense romance, quick marriage, gradual isolation from friends, elimination scheduled for after 4 years of marriage. Method: accidental fall followed by head trauma. He had planned my death from the beginning, from the first meeting, the first conversation, the first kiss. Everything had been calculated, rehearsed, executed with surgical precision. I found my entry next to the notes on Bethany and Caroline. The methods were always similar but adapted to each situation. Bethany had fallen down a staircase. Caroline had drowned in the bathtub. I would be the victim of a backyard accident, likely pushed into the hole and left there to die, or killed before and buried. I cried for hours after seeing that, not for Michael, but for myself, for how long I had lived beside a monster without noticing, for how I had been manipulated, used, transformed into nothing more than a financial transaction. My family finally found out everything. My sister flew in immediately to stay with me. My mother went into shock and needed medical monitoring for a few days. Everyone had adored Michael. He had been the perfect son-in-law, the attentive brother-in-law, the exemplary husband. The idea that it had all been a farce and elaborate performance was too difficult to process. "How did you not notice?" my sister asked me one night while we were sitting in the hotel room. It was not an accusation, but a genuine question loaded with confusion and pain. "Because he was good at it," I replied, looking at the wall. He knew exactly what to say, how to act, when to back off and when to advance. He studied this, Amanda. He studied how to manipulate people, how to read weaknesses and use them. And I was vulnerable when I met him. I had just lost our parents. I was alone, lost. He took advantage of that. Amanda took my hand and squeezed it. "This is not your fault, Sarah. None of this is your fault." Rationally, I knew she was right, but emotionally, I carried a huge weight of shame. Shame for having been fooled. Shame for not having seen the signs. Shame for having blindly trusted someone who was planning to kill me. The trial was fast. With all the evidence, Michael did not have much room to maneuver. His lawyer tried to claim temporary insanity, but the meticulous notes in the notebook, the detailed planning, the cold execution of previous murders, all that proved he was perfectly aware of his actions. I was called to testify. I had to sit in that courtroom a few feet from Michael and tell my story. Look at him while I recounted how I had been manipulated, deceived, almost killed. He looked at me during the entire statement. Not with anger or remorse, just with that same empty expression, as if I were a math problem he had failed to solve properly. When it was his turn to speak, Michael refused to show any regret. He said he had done what was necessary to survive in an unfair world, that women like me, who inherited wealth without working for it, did not deserve it, that he was just redistributing resources more efficiently. The coldness with which he spoke was disturbing. Even the judge seemed affected. He was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, one for each confirmed victim: Bethany, Caroline, and the attempt against me. The prosecution was investigating other cases, still of women who had disappeared in suspicious circumstances in cities where Michael had lived. When the sentence was read, I felt an immense relief, but also a strange emptiness. Justice had been done, but the scars remained. I went back home weeks after the trial. The police had released the property, but I could not look at it the same way. Every room carried poisoned memories. The living room where we watched movies, the kitchen where he made breakfast for me on Sundays, the bedroom where we slept together, where he held me every night while planning my death. Mrs. Linda appeared the first day I returned. She brought a homemade cake and a kind smile. "How are you?" she asked, sitting with me on the porch. "Surviving," I replied honestly. "I think that is the best description. Just surviving." She nodded, understanding. "It will take time. Trauma does not heal overnight, but you are strong, Sarah, stronger than you imagine. I do not feel strong. I feel stupid, broken. You are neither," she said firmly. "You were the victim of a sophisticated predator. That does not make you weak or foolish. It makes you human." We stood in silence for a moment, watching the yard. The hole had been filled, the grass replanted. Soon there would be no physical sign of what had happened there, but the emotional marks would remain for a long time. "Why did you do this?" I asked suddenly. "Why risk so much to save me? You didn't even know me well." Mrs. Linda sighed, looking at the horizon. "Because I have seen too many victims throughout my career. Women who were deceived, used discarded. And most of the time, I arrived too late. I could only collect evidence close cases bring post-mortem justice. But with you, I had the chance to arrive in time, to prevent another life from being wasted. I could not let that opportunity pass. I felt tears burning in my eyes. Thank you. Thank you for not giving up on me." She squeezed my hand. "You do not have to thank me. Just promise you will keep living for real, not just existing. Do not let him steal more from you than he already stole." It was a difficult request, because Michael had stolen a lot. He had stolen my trust, my innocence, my capacity to believe in people easily. He had transformed every relationship I had into something suspicious, tainted. But I promised to try. I promised her and myself that I would not let that trauma define me forever. The first few months were the hardest. I started intensive therapy twice a week. My therapist, Dr. Pauline, was a specialist in trauma and PTSD. She helped me understand that what I was feeling, the constant fear, the recurring nightmares, the generalized mistrust, were normal responses to an abnormal situation. "You went through a deep betrayal," she explained in one of the sessions. "It was not just the discovery that your husband wanted to kill you. It was the realization that the person you trusted most, who shared your life, your bed, your dreams, was never who you thought he was. That shakes the foundations of what you believe about relationships, about your own judgment." She was right. I questioned every decision I had made, every moment I had spent with Michael, trying to identify the signs I had missed. How had he managed to fool me so completely? What kind of person was I to not have realized I was living with a murderer? "You are not responsible for his sociopathy," Dr. Pauline insisted always. "People like Michael are masters of manipulation. They spend years perfecting their masks. It is not a failure of yours not to have seen through it. Intellectually, I understood, but emotionally, I carried the guilt like a stone in my chest. I sold the house. I could not live there anymore. Every room suffocated me. Every shadow scared me. I bought a small apartment downtown in a building with a 24-hour doorman and cameras on every floor. I needed to feel safe, even if it was an illusion. Mrs. Linda moved too. She said she wanted to be closer to downtown, closer to me. She rented an apartment in the same building 3 floors up. She became more than a neighbor. She became family, the only person who truly understood what I had gone through. She introduced me to a support group for victims of domestic violence and abuse. At first I resisted. I was not physically abused, I argued. Michael never raised a hand to me. But he abused you psychologically, Mrs. Linda replied. Manipulation is abuse, Sarah. Control is abuse. And murder planning definitely qualifies. I went to the first meeting reluctant, feeling like I was invading a space that was not mine. But as soon as the other women started sharing their stories, I realized I had more in common with them than I imagined. Stories of subtle manipulation, of gradual isolation from friends and family, of gaslighting when the abuser makes you doubt your own perception of reality, of financial control disguised as care, of veiled threats covered by declarations of love. One woman, Julia, described how her ex-husband slowly convinced her she was incapable of making decisions alone. It started with small things. Let me choose the restaurant. You always hesitate too much. And it escalated to the point where she could not even buy clothes without his approval. Another Mariana told how her partner isolated her from her whole family, creating fabricated conflicts, making her believe everyone was against her, that only he truly cared. I recognized elements of those stories in my own experience. Michael had never been aggressive or controlling in an obvious way, but looking back, I saw the patterns. How he subtly discouraged me from maintaining frequent contact with my family, always with reasonable excuses. How he always knew exactly what to say to make me feel guilty when I questioned something. How I had gradually become dependent on his approval to feel good about myself. I shared my story for the first time in that group. It was liberating and terrifying at the same time. When I finished, I was shaking, tears running down my face. But looking around, I saw only understanding, solidarity, collective strength. You survived, Julia said, holding my hand. You looked evil in the eye and survived. That makes you a warrior. I did not feel like a warrior, but I was starting to understand that survival itself was an act of courage. I went back to work gradually. Graphic design was something I could do from home at my own pace. My clients were understanding with the flexible deadlines I needed. Creativity was hard at first. How to create something beautiful when your inner world was so ugly, but slowly it returned. Every project completed was a small victory. Proof that I was still capable, still functional, still had value beyond being Michael S. victim. Mrs. Linda became part of my daily routine. We had coffee together every morning. She told stories of old cases she investigated, always with lessons included about resilience, about not letting evil win, about the importance of trusting your gut. Your instinct was trying to warn you, she told me one morning. You felt something was wrong even without being able to name what. The problem is we are taught to ignore those instincts, especially women. We are taught to be polite, to give the benefit of the doubt, not to make a scene. But sometimes making a scene saves your life. I thought about the nights I had spent awake feeling that strange sensation in my chest when I looked at Michael. In the times I mentally questioned something he said but let it slide. In the moments when my whole body screamed something is wrong but my head rationalized, found explanations. How do we know when to trust instincts and when we are just being paranoid? I asked. Mrs. Linda thought for a moment. I think the question is not knowing for sure. It is giving yourself permission to investigate, to ask uncomfortable questions, to put your safety above politeness. It is better to be called paranoid and be alive than to be considered trusting and end up dead. It was a hard truth, but necessary. 6 months after the trial, I received a letter. It was from Michael from prison. My first instinct was to tear it up without reading, but curiosity won. The letter was short, written in neat handwriting. Sarah, I know you probably do not want to hear from me. I do not expect forgiveness or understanding, but I wanted you to know that of all of them, you were the hardest. Not because of the execution, that would be simple, but because for a few moments, brief as they were, I came to question if I could actually have something real, if I could stop. But the truth is, I do not know how to be anything other than what I am. I do not know how to feel what normal people feel. And maybe, in the end, you were the lucky one. You escaped. The others did not have that chance. I do not know if this offers any comfort. Probably not. But I thought you should know. You were the only one who came close to making me want to change. It just was not close enough. M. I read the letter 3 times, feeling a strange mix of anger, disgust, and deep sadness. Even now, even behind bars, he was trying to manipulate, trying to plant the idea that I had been special, that our connection had meant something. But it didn't mean anything. Not to him anyway. To him, I was a means to an end, and that letter was just another attempt to exert control to occupy space in my head. I tore the letter into small pieces and threw it in the trash. I blocked any possibility of future correspondence. He would not deserve another second of my time, no fragment of my attention. But the letter made me think of Bethany and Caroline, the other victims. They hadn't had the luck I had. They didn't have a Mrs. Linda watching, protecting, intervening at the right moment. I contacted their families through the lawyers. It was difficult, painful. How do you introduce yourself to people who lost loved ones at the hands of the man you called husband? But they were kind, welcoming even. We shared stories, compared notes, cried together. And somehow that helped. It created a sense of community around the trauma, a shared purpose of ensuring Michael never had the chance to hurt anyone again. Together, we worked with an organization that helped victims of violent crimes. We offered testimonies, participated in awareness campaigns, spoke in schools and universities about signs of abusive relationships, about the importance of trusting instincts, about how predators really operate. It was emotionally draining. Every time I told my story in public, I relived the trauma. But it was also cathartic. It transformed my pain into something useful, into something that could save other lives. And slowly, very slowly, I began to feel less broken. The scars were still there and probably always would be, but they began to hurt less. They began to look less like open wounds and more like battle marks, evidence that I had faced something terrible and survived. 1 year after the trial, I decided to do something I had been avoiding for months. I went back to the neighborhood where I lived with Michael, not to the house. That had already been demolished by a developer, but to the neighborhood, to the streets, I used to walk the places that were part of my life before everything fell apart. Mrs. Linda went with me. "Are you sure you are ready?" she asked in the car. "No," I admitted. "But I think I will never be totally ready, and I need to do it. I need to prove to myself that I can." We arrived in the late afternoon when the sun was starting to set on the horizon, dyeing everything in orange tones. The neighborhood was busier than I remembered. New houses had been built, new families moved in. Life had gone on indifferent to the drama that had unfolded there. We walked slowly down the street. When we reached the lot where my old house stood, I stopped and looked at the empty space. Boards surrounded the place. Construction machines were parked, signaling that soon something new would be erected there. It was strange to think that place which once represented my home, my dreams of the future, was now just an empty lot waiting to be transformed into something else, as if everything that happened there had been erased, replaced. But I knew it hadn't been erased, not for me. The memories were all there, vivid and painful. "Can you see beauty here still?" Mrs. Linda asked softly. I thought for a moment. I do not know. But maybe I do not need to see beauty. Maybe I just need to accept that this was part of my story without letting it define who I am." She smiled approvingly. "That is emotional maturity, Sarah. You are growing through the pain, not despite it." We continued walking, passing other houses, neighbors who waved without recognizing me. It was liberating to be invisible there, to be just another person passing through. When we got back to the car, I felt lighter, not healed, but more whole, as if I had closed a cycle even if the edges were still a bit frayed. On the way back, Mrs. Linda told me more about her past, about the cases she investigated, the criminals she helped catch, but also about the cases she couldn't have solved, the victims she couldn't have saved in time. "I carry some of them to this day," she admitted, looking out the window. "There is one especially, Anna. She was your age, married to a charming, successful man. Neighbors called me because they suspected strange things. I started investigating, but I was too slow. When I finally gathered enough evidence, she was already dead. He claimed suicide. With my investigation, we managed to prove it was homicide. He was arrested. But Anna remained dead." She paused, her voice becoming lower. "That was almost 15 years ago. And since then, I promised myself that if I had another chance, if I saw another similar case, I would not be slow. I would not wait for the perfect evidence. I would act. That was why you pretended to be crazy," I said, understanding. "To have access to protect me without raising suspicions. Exactly. I was not going to let another Anna happen, not if I could avoid it. I felt a wave of gratitude so strong it almost choked me. You saved my life, Linda, literally. And you gave meaning to the last years of my retirement," she replied with a sad smile. "Sometimes I think we saved each other in different ways. That night alone in my apartment, I thought a lot about purpose, about how trauma can break you but can also mold you into something stronger, more aware, more empathetic. I decided to do something concrete with my experience, with the help of Mrs. Linda and the families of Bethany and Caroline. We created a foundation. The goal was to offer support to victims of abusive relationships, educate on red flags, and fund investigations of suspicious cases authorities were not prioritizing. We called it the Rebirth Foundation. The name was on purpose. The idea that even after the most absolute destruction, it is possible to be born again. It was not easy. Bureaucracy, fundraising, structuring. But every obstacle overcome seemed like a small revenge against Michael. Every life we touched, every woman we helped escape dangerous situations was a way to transform my pain into something positive. We started small, a modest office, 2 employees besides me and Mrs. Linda. But the demand was terrifying. We received dozens of messages a day from women asking for help, guidance, simply someone who believed in them when they said something was wrong in their relationships. We implemented a 24-hour hotline, partnerships with shelters. We hired private investigators for cases where there were suspicions but lacked proof, and we created an educational program for schools teaching young people about healthy relationships, about consent, about how to identify abusive behaviors from the beginning. The response was overwhelming. In 6 months, we had already helped more than 50 women escape dangerous situations. Some were extreme cases like mine. Others were situations of psychological abuse, financial control, social isolation. Every story broke my heart a little, but also filled it with determination. None of those women deserved what they were going through, and if I could use my experience, my survival, to make a difference in their lives, then maybe all the suffering would have some purpose. 2 years after Michael S. trial, I received an unexpected call. It was the prosecutor who had worked on the case. She had news. During the ongoing investigation, the police had identified 3 more possible victims of Michael in other states, women who had disappeared or died in suspicious circumstances in periods coinciding with his presence in those regions. One of them, Patricia, had been reported as a runaway by her then-husband, one of Michael S. aliases. He claimed she had abandoned the marriage and disappeared with another man. The case was never investigated thoroughly. With the new evidence, they found Patricia S.'s body buried on a rural property belonging to one of Michael S.'s fake identities. She had been strangled. The other two victims were still missing, but police were digging in, the literal and figurative sense on properties associated with Michael. "We believe there may be more," the prosecutor told me on the phone. "It may be that he has been doing this longer than we imagined, maybe since his 20s. I felt nauseous. How many do you think? Hard to say, but between confirmed cases, suspects, and possibles, maybe a dozen women, 12 lives destroyed, 12 families destroyed, and I had almost been the 13th. He is going to spend the rest of his life in prison, right?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "Without a doubt. With these new charges, he will answer for multiple homicides. There is no possibility of freedom ever again." After hanging up, I sat on the floor of the foundation office and cried. I cried for Patricia. I cried for Bethany and Caroline. I cried for the women whose names we didn't even know yet. I cried for the overwhelming feeling of powerlessness in the face of such evil. Mrs. Linda found me like that, sitting on the floor, eyes red. "More victims," was all I could say. She didn't need more explanations. She sat next to me on the floor, not trying to comfort me with empty words, just staying there, present solid. "What do we do with this?" I asked after a while. "With the knowledge that there are so many monsters out there preying on innocent women, we do exactly what we are doing," Mrs. Linda replied. "We fight, we educate, we protect who we can protect. We do not win every battle, Sarah, but we win some. And every life saved, every woman who escapes, every predator who falls is a victory." She was right. I could not save everyone. I could not undo what Michael had done, but I could honor those who didn't survive, using my own survival to make a difference. That night, we updated the foundation website with photos of Michael S.'s known victims. We created a digital memorial, a space for their families to share memories, so they would be remembered not just as victims, but as whole people who had lived, loved, dreamed. It was painful but necessary. They deserved to be seen. They deserved their stories to be told. 3 years after my near death, the foundation had grown significantly. Now we had 5 offices in different states, a team of 20 people, and partnerships with police agencies specialized in crimes against women. I had become a spokesperson for the cause, giving interviews, speaking at conferences, participating in panels on domestic and psychological violence. It was exhausting, but also gratifying. One of the most impactful talks I gave was at a university. After the presentation, a young woman about 20 years old approached. She was crying. "You just described my relationship," she said, voice trembling. "Everything you said about manipulation, about gradual isolation, about feeling like you are losing your mind is exactly what I am living." I sat with her for 2 hours listening, guiding, helping her create a safe exit plan. I connected her with foundation resources. 3 weeks later, I received a message from her. She had ended the relationship, was living with her family, again was in therapy. "You saved my life," she wrote. I was so confused, believing the problem was me. Now I see he was doing everything deliberately. Messages like that made all the suffering worth it. Every life touched, every mind opened, every woman saved was a blow against the impunity of predators like Michael. But the work also exposed me to horrible stories. Women who hadn't escaped in time, children who lost their mothers, families shattered. Every case left a mark, added more weight to what I already carried. I started having nightmares frequently again, always variations of the same theme. Michael finding me, cornering me, finishing what he had started. I woke up sweating, heart racing. It took me minutes to convince myself I was safe, that he was behind bars, that he couldn't reach me. Dr. Pauline helped me understand this was normal. You are constantly reliving your trauma through the Foundation S work. It is noble, important, but it can also be re-traumatizing. You need to find balance. I started implementing stricter boundaries, 1 day a week, without any work related to the foundation. Time for hobbies, for friends, for things that had nothing to do with trauma or survival. I went back to painting something I loved as a teenager, but had abandoned. I bought canvases, paints, brushes, and I started creating. At first, the paintings were dark, violent, full of chaos. But slowly lighter colors started to appear, softer shapes, hope infiltrating the darkness. I also started dating someone again. This was terrifying. How to trust someone after everything I went through. How to open my heart knowing I was fooled so completely before the first dates were disasters. I analyzed every word, every gesture, looking for signs of manipulation. I questioned everything. I mistrusted any display of affection. It was exhausting for me and unfair to the other people, until I met Peter. We met in a bookstore, literally bumping into each other while looking for books in the same section. He was a history professor, sweet patient with a subtle sense of humor that made me laugh genuinely. Our first conversation lasted 3 hours. He didn't try to impress with elaborate stories or excessive charm. He was just real. He talked about his own struggles, about losing his mother to cancer, about how that made him value genuine connections. I told my story the third time we met. I couldn't keep going out with him without him knowing. I thought it would scare him that he would run away as soon as he knew the level of baggage I carried. But he just listened. When I finished, he took my hand and said, "Thank you for trusting me with this, and I am so sorry for what you went through. But I want you to know I do not see you as broken or damaged. I see someone incredibly strong who survived something horrible and chose to transform that into something positive." I cried in front of him for the first time, not of sadness, but of relief, of being seen, really seen, and not rejected. Our relationship progressed slowly. Peter respected my boundaries, never pressured, always communicated openly. When I had panic attacks or nightmares, he was there, but without smothering, without trying to fix, just present and supportive. "I do not know if I can be the partner you deserve." I admitted one night, months after being together. "I still have so many unresolved things. Everyone has things," he replied. "And I am not looking for perfection, Sarah. I am looking for real connection, and that is what we have." It was liberating to be with someone who didn't demand I pretend to be completely healed, who accepted that healing is a process, not a destination. 4 years after escaping, Michael, unexpected news arrived. He was sick, advanced cancer. Doctors gave him a few months to live. I do not know what I felt when I found out. It wasn't satisfaction exactly, nor compassion. It was something more complex, more confusing. He asked to see me. Through his lawyer, he sent a formal request. He said he wanted to make things right before dying. My first reaction was to refuse strictly. Why would I give him the privilege of my presence? Why risk putting myself in a vulnerable position again? But something pulled me. Maybe the need for closure. Maybe curiosity about what he would possibly have to say. Maybe just the desire to look him in the eye one last time. Not as a victim, but as a survivor. I consulted Dr. Pauline. "There is no right answer here," she told me. "But if you decide to go prepared. Go with someone. And remember, you owe him nothing. Not forgiveness, not understanding, not peace of mind." I decided to go. Mrs. Linda insisted on accompanying me. Peter also wanted to come. But I thought it would be too much. Some confrontations we need to face alone with the people who were there from the beginning. The prison was cold, sterile, with that characteristic smell of disinfectant and despair. We went through several levels of security before being finally led to the special visitation room. Michael was different. Much thinner hair, completely gray skin with a yellowish tone. The cancer was visibly consuming him. But the eyes still had, that calculating glint I remembered so well. He was sitting in a wheelchair, handcuffs on his wrists, despite clearly being too weak to pose any physical threat. I sat at the table across from him. Mrs. Linda stayed standing behind me, a silent, protective presence. "Sarah," he said, and his voice was raspy weak. Thank you for coming." I didn't answer, just looked waiting. He coughed a deep, painful cough. I know I have no right to ask for anything, but I wanted to apologize before dying. Apologize, I repeated, without emotion, for trying to kill me, for killing other women, for destroying entire families, for everything, he said, looking away. I know it means nothing now, but I need to say it. I was wrong. Everything I did was wrong. Silence settled between us. I studied his face, looking for sincerity, for genuine regret, and what I saw was nothing. His words were empty, mechanical. Even now, at death's door, he was acting. "You do not feel real remorse, do you?" I asked calmly. "You are sorry for getting caught, for dying in prison instead of free and rich, but not for the women you killed." His eyes returned to me, and for a brief moment the mask slipped. I saw coldness there, the same coldness from that night in the yard. "I feel what I can feel," he said finally. "I am not like you, Sarah. I never was. I do not know how remorse feels the way normal people feel." "Then why call me here? What do you really want?" He sighed. "Maybe I just wanted to see you one last time. See the one that got away. You were the only one who won, you know, all the others I won. But you defeated me." And there it was. Even dying, it was still about winning or losing, about control, about power. I stood up from the chair. "I hope your last months are long and painful, Michael, and I hope you spend every second thinking about all the lives you destroyed." I started to turn to leave. "Sarah," he called, voice a little louder. I stopped but didn't turn around. "You will never be completely free of me. I will be in your head forever. Every relationship, every moment of doubt, every nightmare. I won more than you think." I turned and looked at him one last time. "You are wrong. You didn't define me. You were a horrible chapter in my life. But you are not the whole story. I choose who I am, and I choose not to let you have power over me." And I walked out. Mrs. Linda beside me, her hand firm on my shoulder. Outside the prison, I breathed the fresh air deeply. I felt like I had just climbed a huge mountain. "How are you?" Mrs. Linda asked. "Good," I replied, and I realized it was true. Better than I expected. He tried one last manipulation. One last attempt to make me feel he still had power over me. But he doesn't say Michael died 3 weeks later. I didn't go to the funeral. I didn't send flowers or condolences. I just kept living, kept working, kept healing. His death closed a chapter but didn't open new wounds. I had already processed the trauma. I had already made peace with my survival. He was just a footnote now, not the title of my story. 5 years after that terrifying night in the yard, my life was unrecognizable in the best possible sense. The Rebirth Foundation had expanded to 10 states. We had helped more than 1,000 women escape dangerous relationships. We implemented educational programs in over 100 schools, and we worked with lawmakers to create stronger laws against stalking harassment and psychological violence. Peter and I got married in a small, intimate ceremony, surrounded only by people who truly mattered. It was so different from my wedding to Michael. That one had been a show, an elaborate performance. This one was genuine, full of real love, of real vulnerability. Mrs. Linda was my maid of honor. She was 80 now, still as sharp as ever, still working actively at the foundation. "I am going to work until the day I die," she said. "As long as I have breath, I will fight for these women." We had a son, Gabriel. When I found out I was pregnant, I was invaded by fears I didn't even know I had. What if I carried some damage so deep I couldn't be a good mother? What if I projected my fears onto him? What if the trauma prevented me from loving him as he deserved? But when he was born, and I held him for the first time, all those fears dissolved. Looking at that perfect being, so vulnerable, so trusting, filled me with renewed purpose. I was going to raise a son who understood consent, who respected boundaries, who recognized signs of abuse. I was going to raise a good man in a world that desperately needed more good men. On a summer afternoon, sitting on the balcony of our apartment with Gabriel sleeping in my lap, I looked at everything we built. Me, Mrs. Linda, Peter, the whole foundation team. My phone buzzed. It was a message from one of the women we had helped recently, a photo of her and her kids in a park smiling free. "You guys saved me," the message said. "Thank you for helping me see I deserved more." Tears filled my eyes, but they were good tears. Michael had tried to destroy me. He had dug a literal grave for me, planned my death with the same coldness he planned breakfast. But he had failed, and in the process, he had inadvertently given me a greater purpose than I would have ever found otherwise. I looked at Gabriel, then at Peter, who was reading on the living room sofa, then at the foundation photo on the wall, Mrs. Linda and I cutting the ribbon at the inauguration of our biggest office. I had survived. I had healed. I had thrived. Michael was right about one thing. I would never forget him completely. The scars were still there, probably always would be, but they didn't define me. They were just part of my story, not the whole story. I was Sarah, survivor, founder, wife, mother, defender, warrior, and I was alive, gloriously, defiantly, gratefully alive. And that in the end was the greatest revenge of all. Living well, loving well, making a difference. Michael had dug a grave, but he was the one who fell in it. I was here under the sun, breathing fresh air, holding my son, planning the future. I had won, and I would keep winning one day at a time, one saved woman at a time, until there were no more Michaels in the world, until there were no more women needing to be saved. It was an ambitious goal, maybe impossible, but after everything I survived, I had learned that impossible is just a word. Now, if you like this story, click subscribe and tell me in the comments which part left you wide-eyed. Oh, and do not forget to become a member to have access to exclusive videos I do not post here. I will see you there.